Let's get straight to all the key news out of that hearing with our political editor, Andrew Clennell, who's been taking a forensic look at all of it. And colleagues of John Barilaro, current and former, getting a mention, including the former Premier and current High Commissioner to India, Barry O'Farrell, Andrew.
Yes, I guess it just becomes murkier, this affair, Kieran. We're expected to believe that John Barilaro, former Deputy Premier, goes for this job with the Premier knowing about it, and a former Liberal Premier actually providing a reference, and it's supposed to be at arm's length. So he was quite reluctant at first to name his third referee, and he sought permission in the break from Barry O'Farrell, who's now the High Commissioner to India. But let's not forget, resigned for misleading ICAC. It wasn't just over a bottle of wine. He didn't recall a $3,000 bottle of Grange being delivered to his house. And indeed, when I was working at the Daily Telegraph, we polled what people thought of that. 55% certainly thought he would have recalled it. And he is the one who provided the reference, the third reference for this job. Have a listen to John Barilaro talking about that.
I would have sought Mr O'Farrell's support as a referee, after the application period.
Do you understand that that would have put a lot of pressure on the public service should they decided to refuse you?
Not at all. Not at all, because firstly, it was the recruitment agency that conducted the referee reports. So that's the first point. The second point is that we have an apolitical public service.
And in the last couple of hours, there was a kerfuffle at the committee around timing, in the sense that John Barilaro was working hard to get a cabinet submission up saying that the Trade Commissioner role should be executive appointments. We know he ended up winning the New York Trade Commissioner role, and after controversy, he's had to give up that position. And it emerged that he got that through cabinet around a week before he announced he was resigning from Parliament.
I just want to take you back, Mr Barilaro, to that final week. It must have been a frantic week, that week of the 27th of September through to the 1st of October, leading to the events of the 3rd and 4th of October. So really your final week in the job. And that hit the cabinet table in relatively record time. I won't ask you to comment on that, but just 7 working days.
The timeline may look frantic, but it was business as usual.
Are you honestly telling me that the urgency around the cabinet submission wasn't at all related to the fact that you anticipated that at some point in the future Ms Berejiklian would have to resign?
Well, I will absolutely refute that disgusting slur and accusation.
Which part of it's disgusting?
No, it is.
Which part of it?
You're making me out to be corrupt.
On the 16th of September or thereabouts, you lodge a cabinet submission to convert them into ministerial appointments. On the 24th of September, you've declared to a court that you're intending to resign. On the 27th of September, the cabinet agrees with your submission. On the 1 October, the Premier resigns. On the 4th of October, you resign. Equally, it does look like that cabinet submission was being put forward urgently because you knew that at some point Ms Berejiklian was likely to have to resign, because, as you've already admitted, you have been a witness in the ICAC proceeding. It does look like you fast-tracked that cabinet submission in order to be in a position that the job was vacant at the time when you could therefore thereafter apply to it. That is what it looks like.
Is that the accusation you are making?
I'm not making any accusation, Mr Barilaro, but I'm just saying, if you take the events...
Well, you are.
Okay, you can see what Labor's trying to say here. They're trying to say that he set up the roles, he got them through the process they needed to get through to be a cabinet position so that he could then apply for the roles. John Barilaro's story is, at that point, in August last year, he wasn't applying for the roles, but after quitting Parliament, he decided in November, why not apply for the roles? And he says, I didn't know Gladys Berejiklian was quitting, so I didn't know when I was going to leave Parliament. But the Labor members pointed out he'd given evidence in camera on September 10 at the Gladys Berejiklian ICAC hearing, so he must have known she was under investigation and probably on the way out. Here's a further bun fight between John Graham, the Labor member, and John Barilaro about the timing of all this.
You're trying to say, and what you're suggesting here is that I knew I was going to retire, therefore I was creating this job for myself. I know where you're going with this, and that is absolute rubbish, which I refute. I completely refute.
This
evidence does not actually back that, does not back that at all, because all it says is I will not face another election. I think that's quite clear.
Well, perhaps your colleagues might have wanted to know. That's important context as you
not at all
advocate to change these roles to ministerial appointments.
Not at all, because when you say it like that, what you're trying to say is that I was advocating to change these roles to benefit me. No, I was changing these roles based on leadership meetings, based on the request of some MPs and ministers, based on the aspiration of the government through Global New South Wales, a document created by Treasury. I'm entitled to answer. I'm entitled to answer the question. So
your colleagues might have wanted to know this.
No, because there was nothing to know. There was nothing to know. Actually, my colleagues publicly knew. A lot of my colleagues.
You were going to resign. That they might have appreciated. But
actually, it was quite public. It was quite public that a lot of my colleagues knew that I was not facing the next election.
Mr. Barilaro.
It was very public. And as I said, it was very possible I could have even left back when I took leave. And the reason why I didn't choose to do that, because that's not what I wanted to be remembered for. I didn't want to be remembered for leaving on mental health grounds. So I worked damn bloody hard to get myself back together with a lot of psychiatric and psychology work. I dealt with some demons.
Okay, it gets worse. So the Labor members raised John Barilaro seeking a job for his now girlfriend, Jennifer Luck.
Did you make any declarations to Amy Brown when you were giving her a reference and or pointing to the fact that she wanted a job in Investment New South Wales?
In declarations in what way?
That you were in a personal relationship with that media advisor?
I wasn't in a relationship at that time.
We're flagging that we will be spending more time on this next Friday, this coming Friday, which is how you came to know about the job and the information that someone you were in a relationship with who, can I just say and flag with you, in documents clearly was aware about the various processes associated with the advertising and the nature of this position.
So Jennifer Lugston is working for John Barilaro, and the committee hears, or the committee's heard a lot about this public servant, Amy Brown, who's said to have ferried through with Stuart Ayres' encouragement the Barilaro New York Trade Commissioner appointment. They hear about this phone call Barilaro makes to Amy Brown pressing the claims of Jennifer Lugston. Barilaro says it's after this that the relationship started with Jennifer Lugston, but I guess the potential for more scandal there. And we know John Barilaro is back on Friday, so I think that'll be examined even further, Kieran.
And it goes to the judgment, a lot of this, to the leadership of the parliamentary party, and it all within a year, much less than a year now, from the next New South Wales election.
That's right, and I think this is the interesting bit in a political sense and a leadership of the state sense, Kieran, is that John Barilaro has gone from Parliament. Stuart Ayres has now gone from the ministry, and most likely he'll retire from Parliament. Dominic Perrottet is still the Premier. And we heard evidence this morning that John Barilaro tipped him off twice, saying he was going for this role. Even before he left Parliament in November, December last year, Perrottet never tried to dissuade him. So you'd have to think the public service and the selection panel, knowing Barilaro is a candidate, must think there's a nod and a wink towards that. And how else could Barilaro take it? He's warned Dominic Perrottet. He's almost sought permission to go for the job here. Have a listen.
And I had a conversation previously in late November when I thought about this role in a passing comment with the Premier of New South Wales.
And where did this conversation take place?
Look, I just can't recall, but it might have been a phone call, just a phone call. There was many phone calls after I left with Mr. Perrottet. He was always checking in on me. He was checking in on me, and on one of those occasions I flagged, as I said, that I'd be interested. He had nothing more to say than go for it.
And in one of those conversations you said you raised an interest?
Yeah, I just mentioned that, I was thinking about the trade role to the Americas.
Do you recall precisely what you said, or is that the best recollection?
I think that'd be the closest I could recall.
And what did he say?
All I remember was like great, or what I think it was just like great, and that was it. I ran into Premier Perrottet in Martin Place late January, early February.
Okay, and what happened then?
And that's when I told him I applied.
So John Barilaro is telling Dominic Perrottet, I'm going for this job. This is Dominic Perrottet's opportunity, a political opportunity to say, I don't think that's going to look very good. You're only just leaving Parliament and you set up these jobs. He fails to do so. The other guy who fails to do so is the Treasurer, Matt Keane. Barilaro and Keane hate each other, but Barilaro decides to tell Keane. Why? I think it was to make sure that Keane would not kick up a fuss about the appointment. Again, Barilaro gets reassurance out of that exchange.
I mentioned with Minister Keane that I was considering it, applying for the role.
And what did he say back?
I think he just said he was supportive. I actually don't know. I can't recall the exact word. He was supportive.
And your predominant purpose in testing the proposition with Minister Keane was in order to identify whether or not the government would fear a political controversy?
Not necessarily. Look, there's no question that, I over the years have forged friendships with former colleagues, and like most people would do, they would reach out to some of those colleagues and to get some level of counsel. But
were you testing whether Mr Keane would push back on your appointment?
Not necessarily. I know people think that Minister Keane and I might have been, foes, not friends. But if you go back to my final speech, I did actually talk about our friendship.
So it's been a couple of months or nearly 2 months of this distraction, so damaging in a political sense, and this has gone over all sorts of details, as we've touched on already, including the whole timeline of Barilaro's decision to resign as Deputy Premier.
I think this timeline is quite interesting and instructive, so I'll take you through it, Kieran. Let's start with last June around budget time, before the great Sydney lockdown, which he says changed his mind. Barilaro says he was thinking of resigning then.
I had enough. I had enough. We had reopened. Tuesday was budget day, and I was considering at that time, talking to a couple of friends, that I would announce on the Thursday morning and call for a party room meeting so that I would leave. That was my plan. That's what I had in my head to do. And what stopped that was, on Tuesday night, was a budget dinner. Adam Marshall went down with Delta. We went into lockdown. We were put into isolation. And as some of my confidants were telling me this is not the right time to now leave. The decision to leave on the 4th of October was a decision that I made only spontaneously after the Premier Barilaro resigned on the Friday. In my mind, I thought, this is an opportunity for me to leave.
On August 31 last year, I get wind that the New South Wales government, with Barilaro as Trade Minister, is looking at potentially employing Jodie McKay, the felled former Labor leader, to a trade envoy post, trade commissioner's post in India. The assumption at the time is this would allow them to appoint some on their side to similar roles, and would also give them the Strathfield by-election, a marginal Labor seat, at a time Gladys Berejiklian had never been so popular. Let's look at that story and Danica DiGiorgio's question to John Barilaro about it at the time, and look how uncomfortable he is on September 1st or thereabouts last year, talking about the Trade Commissioner roles. McKay has told me that as things stand, she is committed to supporting her community through this outbreak, so won't be leaving just yet, but has confirmed discussions with the government about potentially taking up this role. Gladys Berejiklian is essentially in minority government at the moment after Gareth Ward's departure to the crossbench, so there is an opportunity for the Premier if there were to be a by-election in Miss McKay's seat with a margin of 5%. It is extremely unlikely McKay will be in Parliament at the next election in 2023, no matter what happens with this appointment, I'm told, Kieran.
Have you had a discussion with Jodie McKay about her becoming the New South Wales government's trade envoy to India?
As the Trade Minister in New South Wales, I can say that we're always looking for candidates. We're going through a process at the moment. Those candidates could be anyone and everyone, and they're a mixed bag of candidates right across the board, and we'll have more to say about that. But they're confidential in those conversations. They're confidential in the nature of those conversations, and we'll have more to say.
So those candidates could be anyone and everyone. Indeed, they could even be Mr Barilaro. So at that exact time we hear evidence today, John Barilaro is trying to rush through Cabinet, ensuring they're not just public service roles, that they are statutory Cabinet roles. Interestingly, they never went through with this, but this is what he was trying to do, to put it before ministers as to who was appointed to these jobs in early September.
Why did you need to turn around that cabinet submission, that decision so quickly? I think in the matter of a week or 10 days or whatever. What was the haste?
Well, there wasn't haste. My instructions to my staffer was ASAP. I mean, the reality here is that...
Why was it ASAP?
Everything is ASAP. You know, I don't sit back. I'm a minister that just gets on with the job. So the timing may look to this forum and to the public may look like it was rushed through, but, you know, a comment like ASAP, like I just made a comment earlier, I was pleasantly surprised that the department was able to turn around a cabinet submission so quickly.
John Barilaro gave evidence to the parliamentary committee today that he never knew a former public servant, Jenny West, had already been promised the New York role. That's despite this document tabled to the committee with John Barilaro's signature on it from September last year, saying Jenny West should be approved to get the job. Well, it's a digital signature. He says his staff might have done it.
I've looked into this. That brief has a digital signature on it. I don't recall actually seeing that brief myself. It is possible that I gave instruction to my staff to sign the brief on my behalf, but that has a digital signature on it and hasn't got my personal signature on it.
Is it the habit in your office then, Mr Barilaro, that they apply your digital signature to whatever they like?
No, that's not the habit.
So difficult for the government, clearly difficult times for John Barilaro. You could see it through the hearing today, and he described it at one stage as a personal hell experience of the last few weeks.
And to not use his language, a manure show. But I bet he wishes he never went for the role. And we learned today he withdrew from it for a couple of days after getting a job with a development mob, Coronation, in February, just after state by-elections, including for his seat, which didn't go so well for the New South Wales government. But then he re-enters the process a couple of days later. Here is John Barilaro talking about the fact that he says he never sought a favour, although he did seem to seek permission from Dominic Perrottet, and about his personal hell.
I'm not aware of what occurred behind closed doors. They're questions, and rightly so. You've been asking those questions of the agency and the public servants. But as far as I'm concerned, I never sought favour. I didn't seek out special treatment. I went through a public service process, independent, and that's what I believe I did. I applied for a public service job as a private citizen. Nothing excluded me in doing so. I followed the exact same process that was afforded to others. From that moment, I've endured what can only be described as a personal hell, unfair and unjust. If I knew what I know now, I wish I never had applied. If I knew what I knew now, I wouldn't have walked into what was a shit show. And I'm going to use those terms, I'm sorry to say, because the trauma I've gone through over the last 6-7 weeks has been significant.
So it doesn't end here, Kieran. He has to take the stand again, if you want to call it a stand, for a parliamentary committee on Friday. A very messy day's testimony. I think Dominic Perrottet has a lot of questions to answer. Why didn't he discourage John Barilaro from the appointment? Having not discouraged him, why didn't he stand by the appointment? Wasn't that, in effect, a wink and a nod for Barilaro to be going forth in the appointment? The public service, they say they're independent and at arm's length, but Amy Brown, the senior public servants, indicated it wasn't like that. Perrottet's going to be, I guess, hamstrung by this appointment all the way up until the election, whether he says he had anything to do with it or not.